Hello everyone. My name is Anil Mupala. I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Dr. David Joyner. Dr. Joyner is an educator and has immense passion to leverage new technologies to improve student learning, especially in online learning. He received his PhD in human-centered computing here at Georgia Tech. He's currently working as a course developer for Udacity and also as a general course manager for the Georgia Tech OMSCS program. We are very happy to have you here, David.
Thank you, Neil.
Give him a warm welcome.
So like Neil said, my name is David Joyner. I'm here to talk to you about the unexpected pedagogical benefits of making higher education accessible. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about me, just so you know kind of my role in the program and why I, in theory, am qualified to say the things I'm going to say today. I'll talk to you a little bit about our delivery mechanism, how things work in this program, just to give you the necessary background to understand things. I'll talk to you about the accessibility of the program, what actually makes it more accessible, as mentioned in the title. I'll describe the student body that we have and the tools that we use in the program, and then I'll talk about how that student body and those tools combine to form some really unique pedagogical benefits that have honestly been really inspiring for me to see. Then I'll describe a couple open issues, and then I'll close with some thoughts on what y'all should do with this information, since I don't think any of you are directly involved in the OMS program, but there's still a lot of lessons we can use here that transfer to other areas. As like Anil mentioned, I finished my PhD here at Georgia Tech in human-centered computing with Ashok Goyal as my advisor. My focus was on intelligent tutoring systems, so using artificial intelligence to deliver individualized educational experiences, which I think online education has a really nice opportunity to make use of and kind of scale up to the next level. Within the program, I've been the co-developer for 4 different classes: knowledge-based AI, computational photography, educational technology, which is an interesting one to develop in this program because we're using educational technology to teach educational technology, and big data analytics for healthcare. I've also been the instructor for 2 of those courses, knowledge-based AI and educational technology, which is a very different experience than developing it. Developing it is more about filming the videos and putting together the assignment descriptions, and then once the semester starts, you're kind of hands off a little bit more. Whereas instructing, you're actually there day to day in the trenches, interacting with students, managing teaching assistants, things like that. And then I'm also general course manager for all the online MSCS courses, which generally means overseeing things like proctoring exams, hiring TAs, training TAs, generally things like that, helping professors understand what the unique challenges and unique opportunities are in this program. I mention all this because I've kind of seen the various different sides of the program, the development side, the delivery side, all the different classes, things like that. So it's given me, I'd like to think, a unique perspective on what makes this program kind of unique and what leads to the unique benefits that we see happening here. So to give you a little bit of background on the program for those who don't know about it, the online Masters of Science in Computer Science program started as a collaboration between Georgia Tech, the big one at the top, and Udacity and AT&T, the small ones down there. Georgia Tech offers up the educational resources, the professors, the teaching assistants. Udacity provides course developers to produce the material that we use, as well as me to do whatever the heck I do. And then AT&T provides the money to create those initial materials. When it started out, it had some questions about how a program like this would actually work online. We see MOOCs used a lot nowadays, but this is a program that, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I'll get to that kind of thing later. There's a lot of things about this program that are actually pretty traditional, pretty similar to what a normal master's program does, and these kind of differentiate it from a lot of MOOC-based learning. In many ways, it's more similar to traditional distance learning. Like traditional master's programs, students apply to the program, they must get accepted, they must meet certain acceptance criteria. In that sense, this is not an open program. You must apply and get accepted to the program. Students enroll in the online program just like they do on the on-campus program. They use Oscar, they have the same system, same everything. Classes are delivered very similarly to the way they're delivered on campus. They have the same kinds of projects, same kinds of assignments. Similar to the residential program, TAs are available to actually evaluate assignments, grade, give feedback and things like that, as well as manage discussions, respond to student emails, which really differentiates it from some other programs where we rely on the idea that the program will scale on its own without us adding extra teaching resources. We can do this because students pay a little bit more than they do for traditional MOOC offerings. And then to complete the program, students must complete 30 credit hours, same as the on-campus program, including 15 within one of the program's specializations. So same graduation criteria as on campus. Generally speaking, the entire program is identical to the on-campus master's program. And in fact, as far as the technical elements of the system are concerned, it's not a separate program, it's just a different campus. So just like we have our Savannah campus and our Lorain campus and our Atlanta campus, we have an online campus. And this is just the Masters of Science in Computer Science offered at the online campus. So So in that way, it's pretty similar to traditional distance learning, but there are some things that set this program apart from the way distance learning has been done for decades. The first is that it's really built for the internet. A lot of emerging distance learning programs use the internet as a delivery mechanism, which is great. It streamlines what we've done for many years, but they don't necessarily take advantage of the unique things that the internet can do to improve the education of the program, whereas this program tries to leverage the internet to actually improve what we can do. I would do this through things like interactive lessons that actually let students have an active role while they're engaging in something, automated feedback on assignments, and some pretty rich online communities that will actually be one of the focuses of what I'll talk about today. Second major thing is that the program is radically more affordable than the traditional on-campus program. It's $170 per credit hour, which is an 85% decrease from what out-of-state students would pay for the Master's of Science and Computer Science program if they were to come here. And that's just tuition. That's not even including the fact that they don't have to uproot their lives, move all the way down here to Atlanta, take years off of their job and lose that salary, things like that. So it's radically more affordable in that sense. When you include the program fees, and if you take the recommendation of taking one class per semester, as we suggest students do, it ends up being about $200 per semester, which is competitive with a lot of emerging online programs offered by industry. And third thing is the increased capacity of the program. Whereas the on-campus program is limited by the size of rooms like this, we don't have any such physical limitations to the online program. And as a result, we have nearly 3,000 students in the OMSCS program in this semester, which makes it the largest master's program on campus. So far, we've had 11,000 individual class enrollments, which means 11,000 instances, a single student taking a single class. And what's particularly interesting, and what I think really sets it apart from a lot of other online degree programs, because online degree programs are not new. This isn't even the first online degree offered here at Georgia Tech, let alone the first one in the world. But what really sets it apart, I think, is that online is merely the campus at which the degree is received. It doesn't qualify the degree at all. The diploma that students in this program receive still says Master of Science in Computer Science. It's the exact same diploma, it's the exact same degree. There's nothing differentiating it. So there's no qualifier saying, well, yes, you got a Master's in Science and Computer Science from Georgia Tech, but you got it in the online program. That's different than the real program. There's no such difference here. These things really differentiate this from, I think, a lot of other online programs that have been done in the past. And honestly, if I saw this 3 years ago, I would have said we were nuts to try this, because the fourth element creates a lot of risk to water down the on-campus program. The other thing is there's no guarantee that they'll work, but I think we've seen some pretty radical results, so I take my hat off to them for being more courageous about this than I would have been. So the main thing I'm going to talk about today, though, is a causal chain that leads to some pedagogical benefits of this program. It starts with some of the things that we've done to try and create more accessibility for the program. So I'll talk about things about the schedule, the geography, the affordability, and the inclusivity of the program. And that leads us to draw some unique types of students, some students that aren't reached otherwise. Those students form a unique student body. And that student body, when equipped with some interesting tools that we use here in the program, have led to some pretty interesting pedagogical benefits, I think. This is pretty much the outline for the rest of my talk. I'm going to talk about the accessibility, the student body, the tools we use, and the benefits we see as a result. To start off with, the first two benefits I'll talk about are pretty standard to distance learning or online learning programs, but I think they still present some advantages to us, so they're worth talking about. The first is the schedule flexibility that we provide students. There are no synchronous class activities. There's no you have to be at class at 9:30 a.m. or 5 p.m. or anything like that. There's nothing that requires you to modify your day-to-day schedule. We often make materials available at the very beginning of class, which means that students who know, for example, that they're going to have a 2-week family vacation or a 2-week business trip can actually work ahead and still succeed. They're not forced to work while on vacation or skip classes just because they have real-world obligations. And students are encouraged, in fact, to take one class per semester. What this all means is that students can enroll and succeed in the program without leaving their current job. So they don't have to stop what they've been working on, give up years of salary, things like that, just to complete their master's degree. And as a result, we've drawn some current employees from some pretty significant companies. We have current employees from Google, IBM, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. Other places include the Department of Defense, Udacity. Several universities have professors who are actually students in the program. A pretty interesting array of people from different careers, which actually makes the program a really fantastic networking opportunity above all else. I actually sometimes compare it favorably to the MBA program we have here at Georgia Tech, where one of the things I was told, I briefly started the MBA program, and one of the things I was told when I started it was, this program is far more about who you'll meet through this program than what you'll actually learn in class. And this is very similar, that what you learn in class is valuable, but the opportunity to network with these people and kind of work alongside them is an incredible opportunity on its own. As far as geographic flexibility, obviously if it's an online program, it's available pretty much everywhere in the world. We have students from 100 different, actually I'm getting ahead of myself again, but generally speaking, we have not seen any major obstacles to students accessing our materials from pretty much anywhere in the world. We experience some firewall or VPN issues sometimes, but generally students are able to retain access, which means that students may enroll and succeed in the program without uprooting their families and lives. Many of our students have families, they have kids, they have people they're taking care of, and it's just not feasible for them to say, hey kids, we're gonna move to Atlanta for 2 years, move you to another school, just so I can get a master's, then we're gonna come back. They just can't do that. But through this geographic flexibility, they don't have to do that to enroll in this program. And as a result, we have students from every US state and almost 100 other countries actively enrolled in this program. One of my favorite quotes from a student in the program is, I'm gonna mess up the locations and the assignments, but he said, I submitted project 1 from Israel, I worked on project 2 in Palestine, I worked on project 3 in Mongolia, I believe, and I submitted project 4 from at home in Portland. And so he was traveling all over the world, I believe working with a nonprofit during the time, and that didn't get in the way of his working on this program. He was still able to complete his work and did fantastically. And that's a kind of flexibility that goes beyond just you don't have to move to Atlanta. It's, we don't really care where you are. You can be all over the world. But those two benefits are pretty standard, I think, to most distance learning programs. They're built for people who can't move and can't dedicate that real time. The two things that set the OMS program apart from those other programs, I think, the first is affordability. As I mentioned, the program costs $170 per credit hour. With fees, the program costs $200 per month. And what that means is that students can enroll in the program even if it isn't a career move for them. Traditional master's programs can cost anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000. And no matter how much, I would argue, you love learning, you're not going to invest that much money just for something you enjoy unless you have a lot of money to spend. Here we actually have a setup where students can basically enroll for the cost of a car payment or a power bill during Atlanta summers at least. And that's a lot more affordable, it's a lot more accessible to them. And that means that we have students enrolled in the program that cite learning as the top motivator for being in these classes. And in fact, that is the top motivator from the surveys we've taken in the classes that I teach for why students are actually in the program. The number one reason they state is that they love to learn and they want to learn more about this material. They don't, some of them cite, but most of them don't cite it as a career move, a way of changing into a new career, a way of moving ahead in their current job. Most of them cite that they just want to learn more about this. They can do that through MOOCs and things like that, but the master's degree we attach to it just kind of provides that nice little extra forcing function that it's, I get to learn, I get to do it affordably, and I also get a master's degree out of it. That's kind of nice. And the fourth thing is inclusivity. I mentioned that there are no physical limits to the program size. There's not a limited number of seats in the classroom. There's not a limited number of anything like that, I guess. Which means the program may accept all qualified students, not just the most qualified until we reach a certain threshold. I believe the normal way to approach admissions is we can let in this many students, so we're going to take the best of the applicants that we get. As a result, 50% of the applicants to this online program are accepted. Students include teachers, scientists, physicians, homemakers, people that might not be competitive with others if they were just applying to a more limited program because they don't have the experience in software engineering, they don't have the computer science experience to necessarily gain admission at the expense of someone who actually has a background in this. But they're willing to work, they're willing to learn, and they're willing to do what it takes to succeed. And they're able to get into the program because we can take anyone who seems to have the potential to succeed. On campus, the acceptance rate is around 10 to 15%, and if it was not limited, it would be closer to this percent. The acceptance criteria aren't different online. The only difference is that we aren't limited by this artificial limitation of how many students we can enroll. So as a result, we get some really interesting, a really interesting, diverse set of student backgrounds in the program. So we see these effects coming through in the student body demographics. The most telling difference is that the age of our online students is radically different than our residential students. These numbers all come from last fall's CS 7637 class that Ashok and I delivered. We delivered the course in parallel between online and in-person offerings. Took the same surveys, same assignments, same projects, same everything. Everything was identical between the two. And so we were able to look at some of the demographics of the two groups to see how they differed. And what we noticed, first of all, you'll notice, is that the residential program, 82% of the students in our class were under age 24. Whereas online, that was only 15% of the program. The online students were significantly older. And while we had barely 1% was over 35 in the residential program, over 35% were over the age of 35 in the online program. So it's a much older student body. Our gender split is pretty different as well. On campus, we have 24% female, 76% male. Online, last fall, it was 10% female, 90% male. This has gone up program-wide to 13 and 87, gone up a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
Are these the figures for the whole campus or just the computer science department?
These are the figures just for this class, actually. So yeah, this was just the class we offered last fall. The one I just said, the 13 and 87, is for the entire online master's program this semester. So, but these are all just for, excuse me, 7637 last fall. We also see in terms of nationality that the vast majority of our online students are actually Americans, whereas 2/3 of our on-campus students are international students, which seems a little counterintuitive until we look at the reasons why students are enrolling. They're largely enrolling because they already have jobs, they have families that they can't give up to enroll in a master's program. So it doesn't necessarily have just that geographic appeal to international students who can't move to Atlanta. It also loses a lot of the benefits that international students receive from enrolling in the program as well. There's not that, sorry, yes, Mark?
I'm going to ask the same question again. The residential line, is this the whole campus or is this Causal?
This is, I believe, just CS 7637, the class we delivered last fall. Yeah. So it's not the best representation of the entire campus, although I did check the numbers and they're not that different for the program as a whole, but they're definitely not the whole campus. This is only Masters of Science in Computer Science and Online Masters of Science in Computer Science. So just comparing those two. What's interesting, though, is that when you look at the kind of the nuts and bolts behind the numbers, within the international and domestic categories, the gender split is actually the same within those across both programs. The difference in the gender split between the online and residential programs is largely explained by the difference in the nationalities across the two groups. So the fact that our on-campus students, our online students are much more domestic and our domestic students are much more male and female actually is largely the reason why that gender split is what it is. The good thing is that both these numbers have been going up. Both the gender number, the number of females in the program and the number of international students have been going up semester over semester since the program started. And we're starting to see some really nice student-led efforts to recruit more people to make the program a bit more diverse in that way as well. In terms of prior education, our online students are much more educated. Many of them already have master's degrees. Several of them already have doctoral degrees, which is really kind of nice to have as students in your class because they either lend a lot of credibility to what you're saying if they verify what you're saying, or they can challenge you and actually have the clout to do so, which is intimidating, but also really inspiring to see discussions that aren't just about students kind of learning the material. They're people who can really contribute to the world and have experience professionally in these areas. Probably the biggest difference that we see is that 90% of our online students are employed full-time, whereas 80% of our residential students aren't employed at all. And so we have a lot of full-time workers in the program, which basically justifies the need for this flexibility. And that flexibility is the reason why we can draw this kind of student body. In terms of years of computer science experience before entering the program, our online students are much more experienced with programming. So many of them have come into the program already qualified to work in a lot of our classes. And perhaps most telling is that the number one reason for enrollment stated by our online students was that they found the topic interesting. They wanted to learn more about it. The number one reason stated by our on-campus students was that they needed the course to graduate, which there's nothing wrong with that. The program is a way of learning material overall, but the number one reason for this particular course would be because you need to fill that credit. But it's interesting to see so many online students stating basically they're in this class because they want to learn this material. So I mentioned that the accessibility efforts that we have lead to a unique student body, but I would at least argue that if we were to just take this student body and put them in an on-campus program, we wouldn't see the kind of benefits that we've seen in this program. And the reason is, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And the reason is that the program tools actually allow the students to have some influence over the course that they wouldn't have traditionally on campus. So there's a lot of pedagogical benefits that come not only from the unique student body, but from the way the tools empower them to affect the classes that they're taking. So I'm going to go through, so I'll briefly go through the program tools that we use. And in fact, there's two I want to focus on. One is Piazza. Piazza might be familiar to anybody who's taken any on-campus class sometime in the past 8 years, I believe. Piazza is a classroom forum for discussion, questions and answers, announcements, messaging. It can really be used for a lot of different things. I think it's basically an assignment submission system away from being a new learning management system. It's used in 100% of our online MSCS classes. Every single class uses it almost by default. And I describe it as the virtual classroom for the program. So we often use a metaphor when working on this program of where is the classroom. There's this tendency to view the classroom as the lecture videos that students can watch to complement their class process. Students have a body of pre-recorded material that they watch that are effectively replicating the lectures that they would receive in person. And there's a tendency to view that as the virtual classroom. You go to the classroom to listen to a professor lecture, there are the lectures, so that's where the classroom is. But in practice, I think we see that Piazza actually becomes the virtual classroom. It is where the students have the kind of interactions and the good discussions both amongst each other and with instructors that really characterize that physical classroom. Piazza is available to on-campus classes, and it's used, I think, in a great number of them, but it plays a fundamentally different role online because rather than being a complement to the in-person classroom, it actually is the classroom. So it's elevated kind of a more central place within the course structure. And because it's central to the course, because it's where students go to experience the class itself, we see many benefits that Piazza has come through more cleanly because students are relying on it so heavily as opposed to Piazza on campus, which in our experience, at least when we did our comparison between online and on campus last fall, students on campus mostly just used Piazza when they had a question. It wasn't for discussion, it wasn't for conversation, it was, I can't get my code to run, or when is the assignment due, or things like that. And it's really built as a Q&A forum, so that was kind of natural. In the 2 years of the program, across the classes we've had, there have been over 250,000 student posts and 35,000 instances where students were answering one another's questions as tracked by Piazza. So it's been a pretty foundational element to the activity of the program. The other tool is a tool called Peer Feedback that was developed by a master's in computer science student here at Georgia Tech who has since moved on to Facebook and abandoned us. It's a tool for giving students peer review of their assignments and projects. It's used in about 33% of our online MSTS classes. And it's important to note this is peer review, not peer grading. We don't ever use it to generate grades for classmates. That's used a lot in MOOCs where they can't hire more people to grade more assignments because that would blow out the accessibility of the low cost of that program. But here where we can actually hire more TAs to afford for more students, we usually do so and have expert grading. But it's still a very useful learning activity for students to be able to see the assignments that their classmates have produced and receive feedback from their classmates as well. And the act of giving feedback has been proven to be a pretty significant learning activity as well. In a bit over a year of using this system in the program, there have been 40,000 peer reviews on over 17,000 student assignments. So there's a massive quantity of peer reviews coming out. In related news, if anyone wants to do a PhD or something on linguistic analysis of participation in a graduate program, please come do it because we have all this data sitting here waiting for someone to do something with it. So if you have any interest in that, please let me know. I'd love to see what comes out of that. So it's really the combination of this student body and the tools of the program that lead to these pedagogical benefits. And I'm going to briefly run through 8 pedagogical benefits that we've observed as a result of the combination of this student body and these tools. So the first is student-initiated discussions. In traditional classrooms, I think we see that student-initiated discussions compete with an instructor agenda, in that an instructor has an agenda for a particular class period. They may have some time set aside for questions, but at least in my experience at Georgia Tech and in other classes, I've never seen an instructor basically come to class and say, what do y'all want to discuss today? Which would be nice, but if the students don't have any idea, you've kind of wasted a class period. And so there's this idea that if I have an idea for a discussion and I raise my hand and say, Rich, I'd like to discuss something in class today, I'm basically saying, I know you have an agenda for class today, but I think what I'm proposing is more important or is more valuable. And that's kind of difficult to do. Even if it's something the instructor would like to see, it's difficult to get the confidence to say, I think what I'm going to talk about is more important than what you have. In a forum-based classroom like what we have here, those don't compete. I can post my discussion, an instructor can post his, and they're in parallel. They don't necessarily have to draw attention to one or the other. There's not this finite resource of time that we're both competing for. We're competing for student attention, but in theory, students can self-select and identify what they want to spend their attention on. And so as a result, in the class that I'm teaching this semester, which is CS 6460 Educational Technology, in the first 10 weeks, we have 300 student-proposed discussions where they just post ideas, questions, articles, things that they want to bring up, which probably goes beyond what I've experienced in 10 years at Georgia Tech, just because there's not really the same mechanism for doing this. Second is parallel discussions, which kind of goes back to that one. In a traditional classroom, either you have everyone in the class participating in the same discussion at a time, which at the end of this we'll have a Q&A section where we all have to listen to one another's questions and wait for the answer and then move on to our own. Or if we divide the class up into smaller groups, everyone can have their own discussion, but they're not benefiting from everybody else's. They're only benefiting from that small group that they're participating with. In a forum-based classroom, these can progress asynchronously. And so multiple discussions can be happening in parallel, and I as a student can come in and say, okay, there's the 3 that I want to participate in. There's the 3 I'm interested in reading about. I'm interested in catching up on those 3 things. And as a result, students can self-select which discussions they want to consume from all of them to none of them. It's not a matter of, I have a limited amount of time and I can only choose one of them, as we have in class, where it's, even if we were divide into groups and say, y'all are going to discuss code, y'all are going to discuss theory, y'all are going to discuss architectures, I can actually participate in all 3 of those. Or if I have a particularly busy week, I don't have to waste time on things that might not be as foundational to the class experience, and I can focus on those things I really need to do. Similarly, in traditional classrooms, discussions end when the class period is over. There's a finite amount of time that we have to put to these. Online, they don't have to end. We have discussions that go on for entire semesters. And in fact, that's been one of the interesting things that we've seen, is that discussion can proceed naturally so long as students continue participating, which allows for some interesting and deep conversations. In educational technology this semester, for example, we have a small group of students who's interested primarily in game-based learning. And as a result, they've been able to have their own long-running conversations as the entire semester has gone on, as opposed to having to restart the discussion every time they come back. And because it's a small group that's interested in that, it doesn't have to dominate the rest of the class's experience. On campus, that's still possible. They can create their own little special interest group. They can meet along, separately. In my experience, at least, I just don't see that happening very much, because more is needed than just logging onto Piazza and checking to see if anyone's posted in that thread recently. Similarly to that as well is that discussions are all self-documenting. On campus, we have discussions conducted verbally, which means when you leave class, you're left really only with your memory and your notes about what may have been said. In a forum-based classroom, those are automatically logged forever. And as a result, we can see a permanent external memory of all the class's conversations for future use. This was actually really useful in knowledge-based AI, CS7637, over the summer, where we had a discussion the very first week of class that was, what is intelligence? Which is kind of an overarching question for that entire class. And at the end of the class, we came back and basically said, go back to the first topic we had. It's still sitting there. It's only a click away. And look at what you all said. Look at the conversation that you had back then. And critique not only your answer, your kind of well-formed answer that you submitted, but critique the entire nature of the conversation. What was the vocabulary you used? How did that change? How has your understanding of this problem evolved over the course of the entire class? And since we're able to critique not only what they themselves submitted, but the entire kind of class discussion that happened earlier, which is a really nice effect. We've seen other things like students realizing at one point, oh, I need to collaborate with edX on something, or I need some information about edX. I remember a student in the first the introduction topic of the class, saying that they work with edX. I can go back and find them pretty easily. So it's this nice external memory of everything we've done in the class, such that nothing's ever lost and all the information is still there, very easily available for students. In traditional classrooms, we also see that students typically address questions to instructors or TAs or to convenient classmates. I might nudge the person next to me and say, hey, when is that assignment due? But generally speaking, if I raise my hand, I'm going to ask a question. The question's going to go to the professor. The professor can deflect it out to the audience, but it's typically more instructor-driven. In the forum-based classroom, questions are automatically visible and addressed to the class as a whole. So every time I post something, even if I have in mind it's going to the instructor, the rest of the class sees it and they can answer it in the meantime if any of them have an answer. As a result, as I mentioned before, we've had over 35,000 student answers to questions with a radically fast feedback time. The average response time across all our classes is about 30 minutes, which means if you have a question, you can rely on the idea that you can log in and usually get a response at least that night, if not pretty quickly, whereas contacting professors, you have to either wait for office hours, wait for us to answer our emails, which can take 3 to 5 months. So it leads to a really nice rapid feedback cycle. In traditional classrooms, we also see that students have some limited opportunity to significantly impact their classmates. Instructors might build that in. They might build in presentations, build in opportunities for peer review, but it's something that has to be intentionally designed into the classroom. It doesn't emerge naturally. In a forum-based classroom, because we're not competing for this finite time resource and because we can all post anywhere, say whatever we want, students can actually play a major role in helping their classmates by answering questions and more. And the result we've seen is experiences like this. A student once said in a public conversation recently, I don't know how we would have survived if we didn't have her in our class. I can't think of any class I ever took in person where there was a classmate that had a significant impact on my class experience just because there was no mechanism for them to have that. But this was a class where a woman was so helpful on Piazza and so active in answering questions, the students later reflected that she had a profound role in improving their role in the class, or their experience in the class. And she was also a fellow student in the class. That was just kind of what she did. And this isn't an exception. We see several students like this. In every single class, there's 3 or 4 students who are very, very active, and I actually call them de facto teaching assistants, because if you didn't know the structure of the forum, you didn't know the names, you didn't know anybody, and you were to log in and look at people's posting habits, you'd probably assume that they were actually a teaching assistant with how helpful they're being. And the other nice thing about this is it actually allowed us to identify good candidates for future actual teaching assistants. And in fact, that's what's happened here. The woman this quote was about has gone on to be a teaching assistant in the program. It's happened several times that we've basically said, you as a student were really, really helpful when you were a student in the class. Will you stick around for future semesters as a TA and help future students as well? And so it gives us kind of an insight into who would be good for that teaching assistant role that we don't really have when we're just evaluating based on classroom assignments. So peer-to-peer feedback is used in a lot of on-campus classes, especially over in Ivan Allen, I know. But traditionally, this is novice-to-novice feedback, and that's still a great learning activity. The idea of giving a classmate feedback and receiving feedback is a great way to learn, but it's still novice-to-novice, and so you don't really necessarily know the extent to which that feedback is reliable. The idea of critiquing it is valuable, but you don't really have, you still need that expert feedback coming from a TA to really solidify your understanding. But in this forum-based classroom, actually this has nothing to do with forum-based classroom, but in this classroom, with our unique student body made of all these professional students who have rich backgrounds in these actual fields, you're getting critiques from students who've actually done this in the real world. When you're delivering your, for example, in knowledge-based AI, you deliver a evaluation of how artificial intelligence can solve some problem. You might get a review from somebody who not only has experience in artificial intelligence, but has actually addressed that problem in their real world before. We have people in the program who've worked on projects like Google's self-driving cars or IBM's Watson. And so when you write about those things in your assignment, you may get feedback from people who have real world experience with that, which goes far beyond even what many of our TAs can provide. In educational technology this semester, we have a team of 6 teaching assistants that we call mentors, because what they do is really more about working with students over time and developing their ideas than just assigning grades. And they all work professionally in educational technology. One of them's a director of online education at a university. One of them works with Microsoft Learning. One of them works is a high-level executive at I'm going to get the company wrong, Macmillan Higher Education. And these are people who really work in educational technology, giving evaluations on student assignments as part of the TAing, the teaching assistant role. These are people I don't think we could hire if they weren't already students in the program. And the money really doesn't mean very much to them because they're getting paid so much more in their everyday life. But they want to contribute to this program. They want to learn more about this material. They want to help out their classmates. As a result, we really have some amazing people giving students feedback within this program. And that's not something that I think we ever could have planned for or designed for, but it's happened. And the final one is there's a really kind of interesting organic student-instructor interaction that happens as a result of this. In traditional classrooms, I feel like there's some pretty prescribed mechanisms for which, through which students and instructors can interact. They interact at office hours. They interact when they raise their hand and ask questions during lecture. There may be an opportunity to have a discussion with a professor in smaller classes, or there may be staying after class or things like that. But there's usually pretty structured and pretty prescribed. In a forum-based classroom, though, students are having all their own discussions as well. They're posing their own questions, they're posing their own ideas, interacting with students. And as instructors, we can kind of just pop by and give our thoughts. It's not everything is, I am the instructor and I'm going to pour out my wisdom onto you and soak up what you can. It's, I can see them having a conversation, I can see a conversation develop over time, and I can essentially walk in and just offer some thoughts real quick. And as a result, one of the instructors in the program has 5,000 individual posts interacting with students, most of which are in student-initiated discussions, which I think is a level of interaction that goes beyond anything I ever saw on campus. This is not lectures. These are, aside from the videos that were filmed and consumed by students, these are all interactions with students during the classroom experience as delivered by Piazza. So those are some of the benefits that we've observed, that there's really an interesting student community that evolves, and that student community takes a lot of ownership over, sorry, go ahead.
How many students are in that class in particular where there are 5,000 posts between the professor? I was just wondering if there was a cap of realistically how many students could a professor manage in an online format?
So the 5,000 is actually one instructor across all the courses he's taught so far. So it's been four courses, so about 1,200 per course, which leaves, I guess, about 40 per week for that instructor. The classes have varied in size from 100 to 400. So I think our biggest...
These are Piazza posts.
Yes.
Not emails.
Right, yeah, Piazza posts, which actually is really interesting also because it means they're publicly viewable. They aren't necessarily individual interactions with one student, but it's interactions with one student because it's a response to one student or a conversation that are then visible to everybody. So everyone gets to consume these. And as an instructor in the program, I really love it just because it creates a kind of naturalness to the interaction that I can pop by and just kind of say 2 sentences about something. It doesn't have to be delivering this big lecture or delivering this big idea. It's really participating. It's joking around. It's participating organically. It's a really nice kind of level of interaction. And as a result, in my experience at least, I know online students far better than I ever knew in-person students because I see their names over and over again. All of them get to say plenty of things that I get to read or can go back and peruse. And when I see someone posting something, I can say, is this the person that brought up that question earlier in the semester? I see how their understanding has evolved. It's really, really nice as an instructor to have this available. And honestly, I've made some great contacts, some great, honestly, friends through this kind of mechanism and this kind of open interaction. I'm really looking forward to seeing how these students go on to do research with professors and things like that, because it really creates a very strong foundation. It's more than just proving that you can pass the assignments and therefore you're qualified to do research. I can actually see the nature of your thinking and the nature of your contributions. So there's still some open issues that I would be disingenuous to not cover a little bit. One of the open issues is a question that we often get when we talk about this. Is this merely an early adopter effect? We're in the end of the second year of the program. It started in spring 2014. And so we're still largely dominated by people that kind of bought in early. So is this just a matter of the early students are engaged, they're passionate, they're more willing to contribute, and as time goes on, it will settle down into the more traditional student who is more interested in getting the grade and getting out as opposed to really helping out? I personally speculate no. I think that may happen to a certain extent, but the nature of the program, the nature of that structure that allows individual students to have inordinate impact on their classmates means that I feel like we'll always have that 1% of students who are really helpful. But this means that 1% can really drastically improve the class itself. Second issue is, are these benefits automatic? They're not. They're things that instructors need to take advantage of. We have classes that one of their biggest complaints is basically the instructor's never there on Piazza. I never hear from them. I never hear from teaching assistants. It's a student community, but we never hear that professional insight. And so a lot of these are not necessarily things that emerge automatically, but they're opportunities that have to be taken advantage of. And that's a learning curve for instructors and teaching assistants to know the extent to which students rely on Piazza, as well as an additional time commitment. It's not something that you just film the lectures, put them online, and then let the class go. It's still, when you film the lectures, all you're doing is pre-producing the lecture material. Everything else associated with running a class, you still need to do. And a third, and perhaps the most interesting one to me, is that all of these benefits have corresponding drawbacks. The idea that students have significant influence over the class is great when students want to help and students want to participate and students want to play kind of the de facto teaching assistant role. It's bad when a student wants to insult people. It's bad when a student doesn't respect the instructor. And things like that do happen. Oftentimes, not only because they're given kind of the forum for it, and not only because it's kind of that same 1% effect, that 1% of most extreme students will have an inordinate impact, it's also very often because these are students who aren't your traditional master's students. They aren't 23 years old, fresh out of undergrad, and the professor is this real authority on the field that they dare not question. They're people who are established in their field who recognize you, the instructor, are just the equivalent in your field that I am in my field. There's not that authority there, and they feel empowered to question things, which when leveraged correctly is actually really useful because it leads to some real world discussions on the way things are used in person. But in other cases can be very negative. We do see instances of students being very negative in classes and having a negative effect on the course experience for everyone. And figuring out how to mitigate those, I think, is one of the big open issues we need to negotiate, especially with those really rigorous classes, those classes that are built to find, to really challenge students. That can be very frustrating for students, and that can easily kind of flow over into the forum experience and have a negative impact. So figuring out how to kind of defuse those situations is one of the big things we have to deal with. So all this has been about the OMS program. The OMS program is unique in its structure. It's a full master's program, which means it draws certain students, but it's a cheap master's program, which means it also draws certain students. But those effects don't necessarily transfer easily to other domains like MOOCs or large on-campus classes, things like that. And so I wanted to close real quick with some ideas of different things you can do even if you're not involved in the OMS program. So what should you do with this information? Number one thing is, if you have the opportunity, I highly recommend teaching an online MSCS class. If you work in MS, NCS is a great great experience. It's honestly one of the most fulfilling experiences I've ever had, mostly because of how engaged and passionate the student body is. But many of us don't work in computer science, and so that's not really an option. The second thing is to use what I call the Udacity model. For those of you who aren't familiar with Udacity, Udacity runs its own program separate from this OMS program that they call nanodegrees. And nanodegrees are structured as kind of more vocational learning that are really targeted to certain jobs. And they have many of the same issues because they're not MOOCs, they're evaluated by humans. And they have the same issue of how you scale up evaluation. And for them, what they do is they use an army of freelance expert reviewers that are paid per project that they review. It's been actually a really, really useful model because it leads to really rapid feedback time, real authentic expert feedback, and a really good learning experience based on student reviews. So if you have an opportunity to, if you're delivering something more MOOC-based, something like that, using that model can actually be a great approach. I have no idea how you set that up from scratch without that kind of infrastructure, but it's worth looking into at least. Third thing is the Coursera model, which I'm not too familiar with this. Some of y'all might be, and you can correct me on this. But I know Coursera has started experimenting with the idea of volunteer mentors, so the same kind of things. People have completed a class before and can interact on a forum and kind of spawn activity, answer student questions, and encourage that student participation experience as opposed to it just being reserved for those most engaged students. I'm having experience with this, but I can see it actually being very valuable. And the fourth thing, and the thing I'd really love to see more here at Tech, here in the world, anything like that, is more programs like this. We have a master's program that effectively costs students $200 a month and is available anywhere. It's flexibly scheduled and can admit anyone who can possibly succeed. And it's sustainable. The cost, the tuition that we receive from students pays for the costs of delivering a class. So it can be done. And I'd love to see it in more than just computer science. I'd love to see more programs like this. So that's the ultimate thing I'd love to see come out of these findings, is basically that this infrastructure, this idea works, and we can apply it to other domains, we can apply it to other levels, we could apply it to bachelor's, anything like that. So I'd love to see it take off more. So with that, I have to acknowledge the enormous number of people who have helped create this program, the Georgia Tech OMSCS team, the instructors in the program, Georgia Tech Professional Education, the Udacity team, students who have agreed to be highlighted in presentations like this for letting me feature their work. And with that, I'll take questions.
So one of my interests is in blended learning. So I'm looking at your pedagogical benefits of using Piazza and having these great student discussions, and I'm wondering, you know, if I took half my class and put it online, so instead of having discussions in class and I put them in Piazza, I'm just wondering how much of those benefits are contingent on the population that you have, because, you know, your students, their main reason for taking the class is that the topic is interesting. So I wonder if students would participate in extended and parallel discussions.
Yeah.
If they were not those students.
Yeah, so the question, if anyone didn't hear, is basically if we were to give the same tools, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misrepresenting the question, if we were to give the same tools to an on-campus body and have them take it OMSCS style, but be the different student body, would we see some of the same benefits? And I'd speculate that we wouldn't see it to the same extent. We really do see a lot of this comes from the professional backgrounds of the students as well as their own personal motivations and commitment to making things better for everybody else. At the same time, that's actually an experiment I am dying to run, is actually to take an on-campus environment or on-campus class and deliver it OMSCS style and see how much carries over. Because there are certain abilities or affordances in this system that allow students to do things that I didn't anticipate they would do here. And I could just be selling on-campus students short. It could just be that they haven't had the opportunity to engage to this extent the way we've given it to the online students. So I'm assuming that it's partially the student body. It may actually be exactly the opposite, that the student body has nothing to do with it. And you give anyone these tools and this structure, and they'll interact the same way. So I'd actually love to see that experiment. I know Ashok Goyal, who teaches CS 7637 during fall and spring, is doing blended learning as on-campus class this semester as well. He's not here, so I can't ask him how it's going. But I think that also echoes the other thing that this can really be used for is we devote a lot of attention and a lot of time and a lot of resources to developing really high quality materials to serve as a lecture material. I think anyone who's worked on both Coursera and Udacity has commented that the way Udacity develops these courses is more rigorous, and it has to be. It's because they're going to students who are paying for the material. It's not a matter of better because it's just a different student audience. But as a result, we get this kind of interactive video textbook that's very powerful and can then be used to enhance the on-campus experience as well. So, Alex?
So I have a question about the quality of the student, right? You mentioned the fact that on Piazza you see this students are more experienced that you will see, which I totally agree. That's the same experience that I have. But I'm just wondering because my when I look more into that, basically something that I noticed is that there was some class I got this sort of homogeneous quality, so maybe it was some variation, but normally the students are more or less within a range. It's very different for the level. So you have this out of 350 people, maybe 60, 70, 80, 100 that are extremely good and people that will never see in class. And there's a whole lot of students that are not that good, and never appear on Piazza. So I'm wondering whether and I was very excited about the interaction on Piazza as well, whether all the excitement is coming from the fact that out of that many students, of course you're going to get a percentage that are very good, but then there's also a lot that are really not following, that keep asking the same questions, and they just kind of disappear because the more vocal ones are the ones that you notice.
No, actually,
I wonder whether that's the same experience that you're having.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think that's actually something I've thought about as well. Is one of the reasons why this program seems so good is not necessarily because it is better, but because the structure of the program allows the good students to shine more. And so the analogy I use is if I'm in an in-person, so imagine, for example, this is my on-campus class. If I walk into class and imagine that there are enough students in the class to fill every seat, I walk in immediately and I see, oh, only half the students are here. I have a very clear indicator of student disengagement. And what I don't see is the fact that everyone on the front row is taking really rigorous notes, and everyone on the back row is on their laptops actually taking notes as opposed to just putzing around on Facebook or whatever like that. Online, we see the exact opposite. You only ever see someone if they post. If someone never posts, you never see them, except for a summarization screen where you can scroll through and see exactly that. So I've wondered the same, if it's not a matter of the interaction being better, but the good interaction is more visible. I did an analysis on our fall, spring, and summer knowledge-based AI classes, as well as my educational technology class this semester, and initially saw very much exactly that the skew of student participation was absolutely ridiculous. There was 3 to 4 students who each were together responsible for half of all class activity back in fall, and then the bottom 50% were responsible for maybe 10% of class activity. What I've noticed in my analyses since then is that it's evened out a lot, that we still have those extremely active people, but the overall average, the other people have raised a little bit. That's partially because I think tweaks we've done things that either explicitly or implicitly say we evaluate participation, so students feel more obligated to participate for better or worse. I think requiring participation is actually not the best way to get it because then you get inauthentic participation. But I think you're exactly right that there definitely are spikes there. I believe at least that the spikes are more about outliers on the positive end, and that the overall average level of activity by about 80% of students is pretty good, at least in the classes I've evaluated for this semester and summer. So I think you're right that there is a certain element of that is that we see the good activity much more than we see the non-activity.
Do instructors have tools for targeting students that aren't participating?
Piazza summarizes, gives you a summary screen that basically says, here's everyone in your class, here's how many days they've logged into Piazza, which is not that useful because it tells you the days they've logged into Piazza in general, not necessarily your class. It tells you how many topics they've read, how many posts they've given, and how many classmate questions they've answered.
So it's not very convenient, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't allow you to say, ping the students that are not active, right? So you have to do it manually.
Well, that's why I was asking. I mean, Andrew Kang has always anecdotes from his first machine learning course where he noticed that a student wasn't participating. So he, I don't know, he had so he wrote directly to the student and said, are you going to take the next test or are you serious? And that turned out to be the impetus that the student needed in order to get motivated to take the course. So I'm just wondering if there are easy tools that we can put together that would target students, maybe a block of mentors that would monitor students that didn't seem to participate.
So something I do is actually I have a participation group, right? And so I just send a message, in the middle of the semester saying, hey, remember that there is a participation grade. So it's fine if you don't ask questions like that, but at least I want to read the post and so on. And then you get, the activity actually spikes up, but also I see these people can basically +1 all the posts from 2 months ago up to today, and then
Yeah.
this is not participation. So it's difficult. So that it should be a kind of smart tool that is not just checking, because otherwise people will go through this fake participation.
Also, or find a way to have incentives for what you call the de facto TAs function as coaches for students that are still responsible.
And that's actually exactly the model that we use in educational technology this semester. I refer to the TAs as mentors, and that's really what they do. They're each assigned a group of 10 to 15 students, and they grade all of that student's work, not to really grade, but more about developing their understanding of the student's trajectory and ideas over time, rather than just getting the assignment, grading for what it is, and moving on. And they play a role in making sure that students are up to date, not necessarily on Piazza, I still take care of that badly, but making sure that students are up to date on their project milestones and checking the status checks that students submit every week to see, are you still on pace with what you said you were going to do by this point? If not, how do we readjust? So the only difficulty there is that scale there is very, very, very difficult. That I have 100 students in the class and 6 mentors. I have 7, I do that too. And so we have about 10 to 15 students each. To double the size of the class, we would need to double the number of mentors, and that's a challenge. So, yeah, exactly. So yeah, an AI. We actually have people working on the idea of AI agents interacting on Piazza. So, and they have the data for it. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned university also has this nano degree program, and I understand they charge $200 a month for that. Anecdotal evidence seems to be it takes 9 to 12 months to complete that program to get a specific vocational skill. So that's roughly $2,400.
Mm-hmm.
You're charging just maybe twice as much of that to get a master's program. To me, the value proposition is so skewed towards this program because it's a certified, it's a recognized accredited degree. Granted, it's only open to people with bachelor's, so that's a selection. But do you see the nano degree catching any kind of action in terms of employment? Because the reason people take it is for usually better employment.
I should give a disclaimer here. I'm employed by both Udacity and Georgia Tech. So I'm going to try and phrase my answer to that in a way that doesn't get me fired from one or both. Now, I really do see a big difference, though, between the two programs, both pedagogically and in terms of the value that they deliver. That a master's degree from Georgia Tech, in my opinion at least, is very much about proving that you can get a master's from Georgia Tech. It's in some ways a status symbol. It's not, maybe not a status symbol, but in some way an extended test. It's dedication and hard work is required to get through it. And at the end, you have this credential, Georgia Tech Master's, that kind of is self-evident. I don't necessarily care what you did in your classes because I know I have faith in the Georgia Tech brand name. I have a faith in the Georgia Tech Master's program. And I believe that that means something on its own. As a result, and this is actually a comment that students have had, and I think this isn't just about Georgia Tech, this is general to higher education oftentimes, is that the things you learn in a standard program oftentimes are not the things you'll go out and do in your job that you'll get hired for that. I did my bachelor's and master's and PhD here at Georgia Tech and did various jobs along the way. Very little of what I learned in the classroom actually was what I applied in the job. What I applied in the job was kind of the reasoning and the skill that I use, that I developed in those classes. And the job gave me the job because they believed if you can develop the knowledge to pass those Georgia Tech classes, then you've also developed the knowledge necessary to thrive in this position. So in that way, it's a kind of a different idea there. The Udacity model is very vocational. It's directed directly at those target skills. And so you develop a portfolio that indicates you've accomplished those skills. And as a result, if I walk into a job interview, Udacity's brand new, they only started doing nano degrees a year ago. If you're the employer, and I say I have a nano degree certificate in front-end web development, you might not have any idea what that means. That might not have any value in and of itself yet because it's a brand new program. But what I can give you is a portfolio of projects I did along the way. And you might not have any idea what Udacity is, but you can look at what I did to get that nano degree and say, what you did is valuable. And the credential maybe develops value over time, but what you actually delivered is valuable in and of itself. So I think that's the real difference right now between the two, is that in one case, it's the credential that really carries the value. In the other case, it's the work on its own that was used to complete the credential. That can change over time, and I think that what we'll see is more and more focus on kind of those bite-sized things. So the thing with Udacity is that you complete the front-end web development nano-degree program, and you have a certificate in that little realm. But a slight pivot to a different direction, you need more material. And it's great because it means you can do it in less time, and if you need to get more material later, you can do it pretty easily. But it does mean that it's pretty narrow in that, whereas Georgia Tech Masters is pretty general to computer science as a whole. Any job in computer science is going to put some value in that. But I think what we'll see is a transition a little bit more towards those more bite-sized things, especially as these fields change so often, that what I can learn in 3 years, the truth of the world is going to be very different 5 years from now from what I learned in my classes back then. And a model that lets me update those skills more often over time will be very valuable. But now I've had the same observation of both programs cost $200 a month. What are their, we've taken cost out of the equation. What are their relative strengths and weaknesses? So hopefully that didn't just get me fired. Yes. No, sorry.
I have two questions in one. What happens to students, have you ever had same question posted twice with two streams of discussions going on, and then a student who comes to you and says, I have one question that I want to ask, but I don't have time to go through and read through all the posts to find the answer to my question. How would you deal with that?
No, I think that's probably the number one complaint we see across the entire program is Piazza is noisy, and it's hard to find what I'm looking for, and it's hard to navigate, and a lot of that comes down to the structure of Piazza. It's not really built for some of the things we use it for. It's built as a question and answer system, effectively. So using it for discussion doesn't, it misses some of the things. Generally, I think what we see is that we try to take care of that for them, that we try and, we are on Piazza every day. We typically tend to read everything that's posted. And so we have a working knowledge of that question was posted then, I'm just gonna link them back to that question. But there's not an ideal answer to that yet. One thing I've hoped to see is that a student in one of our classes would take on developing a forum custom design for the OMS as a class project. Hadn't happened yet, but I'm holding out hope that it will at some point. So.
So are there currently any beneficial features currently unique to on-campus instruction that you would wish to somehow implement in online instruction? Or is just online just completely better in every single
I should say that for me, there's nothing on campus that I would like to translate online. Part of that, or probably the major reason for that is that I would, and this is going to sound arrogant, I don't mean it that way, hopefully it won't come out that way. I consider myself uniquely suited to teaching in this environment. I'm relatively young as far as instructors in the program go. I grew up on internet forums. I grew up in environments like this. I grew up on online communities. I'm used to communicating in this mechanism. I'm used to interacting with people this way. I have a lifetime of experience in it. So for me, this is much more natural than standing in front of a group of people talking. I can't imagine doing this 3 times a week. I can't imagine teaching on campus in the traditional way. So for me, there's nothing that comes to mind that I would transfer from the on-campus program. That's probably more about me than it is about fundamental benefits to things online. Actually, was almost taught an on-campus class a little while ago, and my thought was, I don't know how I would do that. Everything I would want to do, I would do this way. Can I actually do it that way? So for me, at least, there's nothing I would transfer, but that's probably more me than everybody. I would say that the other instructors can comment on their thoughts on that, but they left. So there were 4 other LMS instructors. So, yes.
Do you see a video link of any kind, given the size of the description? I'm not quite sure how to do it. But, I've been playing around with Blue Jeans, co-teaching class, seeing the code, Paris, and it seems to me there's an opportunity for building a sense of community, even if it's done in fragments with a group. You given thought how that might be applied?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I fully followed the question.
Blue Jeans, like WebEx and some of these things, allow for a video face-to-face link of some sort. And I wondered whether you, in any of the discussion groups, you found evidence that the students are meeting in some video conference combination, and whether or not pedagogically that adds in some way to the value of the sense of community.
So in our classes, in the classes I teach at least, or co-teach, we actually ask that question, basically, how have you met with your classmates in this class? How have you communicated with them? One of the options is both video and audio teleconferencing. Less than 1% have reported doing that. So it's very, very rare in that sense. We do office hours. They're recorded and usually synchronous. They're not required, which is why I can say we don't require any synchronous activities, but there are synchronous office hours available in most of our classes at least, either via WebEx or Google Hangouts or Hangouts on Air. Different classes do them in different styles. Some of them solicit questions in advance and just answer them. Others have more conversational things. I would say that for the people that have participated in that, it has been impactful. And there was actually a story in CS7637 last fall, where one unique thing about that class, unlike other classes, is that we don't record our office hours. Main reason for that is that our office hours are very conversational. They're very kind of natural. We chat more than just answering questions. And in my opinion, at least, if I know that my conversation is going to be filmed and put in front of 400 people and I'm a student, I'm going to be very, very guarded and much less natural in that conversation. And so we don't record them, we don't provide them. And that's different than what a lot of courses do. And so we had a big complaint from students basically saying, why aren't you posting your recorded office hours? And it was actually a student in the class that basically said, no, absolutely not, they shouldn't. What they're doing is the one thing that I thought was missing from the OMS program, was the ability to have a face-to-face conversation with somebody and actually, chat more organically and chat naturally. So for those students who take advantage of it, I think they experience a pretty big benefit from it, but we do see relatively few students taking advantage of it. Less than 1% report video teleconferencing with their classmates. And from personal experience, in KBAI in summer, for example, there were 400 students that started the class, and probably 20 came by office hours ever, and 5 did regularly. So it's a very, very small portion of people taking advantage of that, and that's actually why I haven't done office hours the same way in my class this semester, is that it's a big time commitment for a very, very few number of students impacted, compared to posting on Piazza, where one Piazza post can be seen by everybody and takes far less time. So
What's the size of the average post on Piazza?
it can be anywhere from a couple words to several paragraphs. So I'd say on average, it's usually a couple paragraphs, maybe a paragraph.
I can actually speak to the video conference.
Please do.
So we run the introductory physics courses in the SOUP program at Tech, the summer online undergraduate program, and it's vaguely similar in the sense that it's enrolled Georgia Tech students taking courses for credit. But we had mandatory small group meetings with TAs over Google Hangouts, and we recorded it was a multi-way video conference. And because they were mandatory, there was a lot of, I guess, what they call inauthentic involvement. And the small group sessions, unless we gave them specifically a discussion assignment, the sessions ended up being very hub and spoke. One student would ask a question to the TA would respond. A different student would ask a different question, the TA would respond. And the overall impression we got was that they might as well just be asking these questions on the Piazza. So the 1% voluntary participation doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I think it echoes some experience I've had in that realm, not actually here, but with students I've worked with. Before this, I was a private tutor, and I had a lot of students who worked in online, or were taking online classes. I saw a lot of classes that did exactly that. They required things like post 3 times per week for your participation grade. And in effect, that was terrible, because it was basically students would go around, find enough to say just to fulfill their quota, and post it. But one argument would be, okay, so they don't post authentically, but there are some students who will use that as the motivation to post authentically. The problem is that means the ones who are doing it authentically can't find each other. So if you and I are in a class, this entire class, and you and I are the only ones who care about really discussing something, the odds of us running into each other if everyone else is posting just to post are pretty slim. Whereas if there's no required participation, we're the only ones talking, we have a great experience, they don't interfere, and they're not getting anything out of it anyway, so.
Would be interesting, as the size of the alumni base grows, it would be interesting to experiment with different kinds of cohorts. So, take software development, for example, and develop an entrepreneur's cohort.
Yeah.
So everyone who's currently in or has ever been in that MOOC who has an interest in entrepreneurial stuff, in startups, might be drawn to that. And it may be that face-to-face discussions more likely there, maybe person-to-person meetups are more likely there. There's really not enough people yet to run that experiment, but you can imagine over the next couple of semesters, so many classes will have big student populations.
Yeah, I think that we're starting to see some of that happen already via student self-organization. So one thing that happened is there's a group of students who are interested in going on to PhDs, and they form their own little group where they discuss PhD kind of things. There's another group of students who made sure to take a certain class at the same time because they knew it was a difficult class and they trusted each other, they had a lot of interaction with each other, and so they wanted to make sure that they were there for one another. We see a lot of actual special interest groups, not special interest, but groups forming off-site, mainly student-driven. There's a women's group, there's a group surrounding certain career ideas. I believe there's one for teaching. I don't remember what the other ones are. We see students already kind of self-selecting some of those things as well. And some students have suggested something similar, that a couple of students have suggested for my educational technology class that what I should do, and I'm probably not going to do this, but I might, it's just a little bit big to force this on people, but is to have theme semesters where it's this semester we're all going to work on MOOCs. This semester we're all going to work on intelligent tutoring systems. And so there's a little bit more of a consistent thread across the entire course so that you know everyone else is working on something a little bit more similar. That's been the biggest challenge of that course is people finding people working on similar projects because we have 75 projects in the course. Some are outright duplicates just because they weren't able to find each other. But in what sense? Just in general?
Yeah, well, you've got bricks and mortar classes, you've got online classes, you've got pre-test, post-test. What plans are actually seeing how much students you have?
We've done one thing in that realm, which is the experiment last fall where we basically compared the on-campus and online CS7637 classes head-to-head and found that the online students outperformed the in-person students on everything with statistical significance on half the things, basically. So that was kind of what we did so far. We tried brainstorming a pre and post test for that class. Only difficulty we found was that having a test that students will know anything about in the beginning and then be able to do well at the end is a little bit difficult. So I think we're more reliant on those one-to-one comparisons on campus. Sorry. Mm-hmm.
As a broad question, is there a generally accepted computer science like conceptual survey or instrument or?
Not above the CS1 level. There is one that I only know of because I did my master's research on it for CS 101, basically, for introductory CS. There's the APCS test as well. It's similar for a slight level below. Beyond that, there's really not. And I think part of that is that beyond that, it's difficult even to find classes that are offered among different courses, different universities. In our knowledge-based AI class, for example, that's a class that I know of. I personally don't even know of any classes like that offered anywhere else. I know Ashok knows of 2 or 3, but there aren't very many. And I think that's actually true among many of them. Even things like our computer vision class. I'm sure that if you were to compare our computer vision class to other classes with the same title at other universities, you'd see they have pretty significantly different curricula because they're really driven by that professor's own knowledge, which is one of the things, actually goes back to the Udacity Georgia Tech question, which actually goes back to that, is that one of the benefits of this is that you're really benefiting from a single industry, from a single academic expert on this topic, and you're really getting their notion of the idea, their notion of the field, their ideas. And as a result, there's really, I don't know how much opportunity there is for standardization across different areas. And so I think assessment is very difficult. We thought about that for a couple courses, but ended up bottoming out at the question of, well, how do we do this on campus? Well, we don't. So our best bet right now, at least, is to compare to on campus to make sure it's not damaging the MSCS name for the on-campus program, which I think it's actually improving it based on the quality of these students. But other than that, there's not a lot of things we can do about that. Although I'm very open to ideas because I'm very much a fan of more nicely designed studies on that.
Given the extreme affordability of this program, have you thought about trying to change the world the way that Coursera, Udacity, claim to be doing, teenager in Mongolia? $200 a month to get a master's. And the fact that 90% of the enrollment is still U.S.-based. Is there any effort to try and flip that and reach more people who can? They're the ones that cannot afford themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are definitely efforts to increase that. It's interesting, though. I had a couple experiences with that of a couple international students who contacted me basically saying, I'm interested in the MSCS program on campus, any suggestions? And my first inclination was to say, well, do the online program. It's, you don't have to move here. It's so much cheaper, do that. But there are benefits to the on-campus program for international students that the online program doesn't duplicate. I don't know the full details of it, but the visas, the way they work with the on-campus program, get you something with the on-campus program you don't get online. But I think that making it more accessible so that even without those benefits, it's still a great opportunity for everybody else is definitely one thing we want to focus on.
There is a trend now to international enrollments.
Yeah, that number has been rising semester over semester ever since it started. I think to a large extent, I think we definitely saw the early adopter effect very keenly with those first couple cohorts, that they were the standard demographics of an early adopter. And we're starting to transition right now into the broader world, so.
So actually, about the affordability of the OMSVS, so it's $200 per credit hour.
170, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, 170 per credit hour, 200 with fees, right?
Yeah, per month, sorry, yeah, that's.
Okay. And so then, so what was the comparable figure for residential on-campus?
For out of student, it's 60, no, it's 12, someone will know. Yeah, around 1,200.
But is that the tuition, or is that the average cost per student? Because I mean, I'm in the doctoral program, so I get my tuition is waived. A lot of people are on scholarships or other.
It's actually harder to tell than you would think.
Yeah.
You would think it'd be simpler, but it's not.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's just straight up comparison of credit hour cost. So yeah, for doctoral students, it's very different. Interestingly enough, though, online students who, when they TA, their tuition isn't waived. So it's also hard to compare there because even if they are a TA, we can't just ignore their tuition because they aren't, their tuition isn't waived the way it is for on-campus TAs. So, but then again, their tuition is so much lower that it's effectively waived because, you know, they work for 3 weeks and it probably pays their tuition for the semester, so. That's okay.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, David.
Thank you.
For meeting with us today. We hope you meet with us in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely.